They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And I am so excited to welcome in our next guest. This episode, we are joined by Julie Strauss Levin. She is the senior counsel for the America First Legal Foundation, and she is also the wife of the Great One himself. That makes her Mrs. Great One, Mark Levin, and she joins us right now. Julie, thanks so much, and welcome to Happy Women.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I will tell you that at CPAC, when Matt Schlapp did the billing, he wrote The Great One, and then he wrote and Mark Levin.
And Mark Levin, that's how I would like to introduce you.
I think like somebody I'm thinking it's like some intern messed it up. He was like, oh, no. We got it right. You're the Great
That's
One.
intentional.
I said, yes, I have taught Mark everything he knows, but that's okay. We'll let him think otherwise. Anyway, it's an honor to be with both of you during this most auspicious and almost frightening election season.
I know. As much as I feel optimistic, there is still that looming sense of just not wanting to be slapped in the face like we were in 2020. And we're going to talk about that. I know you've been keeping an eye on things, but first, we love to start out with people's backstories because we have time here in the podcast. We can spread out and chat for a bit. Julie, for people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got to where we're sitting here together today.
So, it's very interesting. I'll tell you a quick story sort of as a preamble. I was general counsel at a corporation, and there was a culture study that was done by the folks who were very much senior leadership. And they sat down and they said, we're waiting to speak to you last because you're the general counsel. And very often people blame things on the lawyers. Like, I wanted to do it, but the lawyer said no. So tell us about you, your general counsel. And I stopped them and I said, the general counsel part, the lawyer part is really down the wrong. First thing I am, first and foremost, the most important things all on the same plane is I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I'm a daughter. And I'm an aunt and a sister. That to me is the most important. So the lawyer part is clearly part of who I am, but the family is the most important. You mentioned Mark, my blessed husband. Between the two of us, we have 4 adult kids, all of whom are great and doing their thing, part to save the world in their own way. Great parents and so forth. And I think Jen, well, I'm not sure. Kathy, you may have met my mom at one point. But in any case, I came to lawyering many years ago, thanks to my dad, who was an attorney and an accountant, and he represented people in the music industry. So I grew up going to the Rolling Stones concerts at MSG and the Beatles and John Lennon and this and that. So I thought, wow, doesn't everybody? And my father used to come home and he'd say, hey, did you hear about Three Dog Night? And I'd say, who? And he said, you're so uncool. Like, how can you not know that? So it was this great kind of bantering, very close relationship I had with my parents. And from a very young age, they expected my brother and I to know all about politics, all about current events. And back then I didn't appreciate it. Now, of course, I do. So, my road to where I am today, and I'm part-time at America First Legal. I do a lot of other work. I work on combating anti-Semitism. I was appointed to Governor Youngkin's Commission to Combat Anti-Semitism. I was on 2 presidential commissions appointed by POTUS 45, who hopefully will be 47. And I would say the most fun and interesting and exciting place to ever be an attorney was when I was deputy general counsel for 26 years for the company that produced Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus and Disney on Ice. And when I tell you that my clients included Asian elephants and performers and big cats, of which I have a tiger named after me, it was amazing. It was hard work, but it was stupendous. And it was there that I was really exposed to the activist left, because the animal activists are rabid Marxists. And so young in my career, I learned the psyche of an Alinskyite and how they would take no prisoners to achieve their goals. And that is exactly what we're seeing here. So it's very interesting that, something like, oh, you dealt with animal issues and getting permits and moving elephants to Japan and this and that. Yeah, true. And it was really great fun. But there was a very serious side to doing that. And part of that was taking on this crazy, radical mentality. I mean, I had my life threatened numerous times by them. We found out they kept dossiers on all the senior officers of Feld Entertainment. And so it was quite the way to cut my teeth and give me a lot of expertise and unwanted almost knowledge and background about the psyche of what we're dealing with today.
It's so interesting. It reminds me of how aggressive PETA and other groups were. I was living in New York in the 1980s, and they had no thoughts at all about dousing women who wore fur coats in either buckets of red paint or buckets of blood. Super aggressive. But I'd never thought about that tie between the animal rights movement and the Marxists. It's super fascinating. All right. I got to switch it to Virginia because this is so much on my mind. So you and I got kind of connected in the last week or so because you very kindly and very fortuitously connected me with a lawyer friend of yours. Well, I'll leave him unnamed because he's not in the political world, but he very graciously accompanied me to the hearing with the federal judge last Thursday, where the judge basically ruled in favor of the Biden DOJ and the League of Women Voters and a whole group of nonprofits who wanted the Youngkin administration to return 1,600 people to the voter rolls. So I was super appreciative of the connection that you gave me because he was a lawyer. And so he really helped me to understand and kind of work through the legal process. So that was fantastic. But it was such an eye-opening experience for me. I will say that the government side, the DOJ and the nonprofits, they probably had at least 12, if not 15 lawyers in the courtroom. On the Youngkin side, there were only 4. So we were all super discouraged with the ruling. Then the appeals court, I guess, did not issue a stay. But the incredible news that the Supreme Court did, and I think we were all sort of surprised by that, right? That even that they would take it on, because judges have consistently seemed reluctant to take on anything to do with election integrity. So the Supreme Court said that Youngkin would not have to restore the 1,600 non-citizens to the voter rolls. And of course, they have other forms of recourse. If they are citizens, there are other ways they can get back on the voter rolls. But I would love to talk to you about this more from a kind of national perspective. We don't have to stay just on Virginia, but you've kind of been dabbling in this world for quite a while. You went to Pennsylvania to look at what happened in 2020. So I just would love to hear a little bit about what you've seen. What happens when the power's out, your phone says no service, and the grid is down? Do you have a backup plan? If you don't have a satellite phone from sat123.com, you're risking more than just missed calls. A satellite phone from sat123.com keeps you connected no matter what. You could be miles from civilization or in the middle of a natural disaster. This phone works when everything else fails. It's your lifeline when the world goes dark. And let's be real, these days anything can happen. But with sat123.com, you're prepared. Sat123 is committed to American values. They believe in reliability and quality that you can trust when it matters most. Don't wait until it's too late. Head over to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off. Protect yourself, protect your family, and stay connected with sat123.com.
So I'm happy to do that. And it really was quite a relief that the Supreme Court did that, because if you both recall, in 2020, SCOTUS took quite a hands-off approach, which, sometimes it's appropriate for them not to take a case, but there were several cases where they really should have taken it on. Now, there was a case where I was not involved in it, but it involved several states seeking original jurisdiction at the Supreme Court after 2020, and they wouldn't take it. I can tell you from my experience. So if you all remember that fateful night of 2020, where we saw things going one way, we went to sleep, and we woke up the next morning, and lo and behold, things were quite different, right? And I said to Mark, as a matter of fact, I'm either going out of the driveway and hanging a left to Philly or hanging a right towards Pittsburgh. And I called a gentleman by the name of Mike Roman, whose name may sound familiar. He's a defendant in the Georgia case that actually is the one who unearthed the Fonnie Willis, what's his face?
Nathan Wade.
Little love turst. And I knew Mike Roman from when I was general counsel at Freedom Partners, and we had otherwise worked together, and he ran election operations for the entire United States for the Trump administration. So I called him and I said, okay, where am I going? Because clearly something happened overnight and it's not right. So he said, we need you either east or west or fine. So I ended up going to Philly. And I actually went with this friend who you mentioned. He ended up getting ill, so he had to leave early. But when we first got there, it was bustling there. And I said, look, I'm coming, whatever you need me to do. If it's to get a cup of coffee for somebody smarter, I'm happy to do it. If you want me to speak to people, I'm happy. Like, it's literally all hands on deck. When you're like right now, it should be hands on deck in terms of getting out the vote and working. But afterwards, if there's issues, also helping out in whatever capacity. So they asked me to start taking statements from people because the phones were like off the hook, people calling with experiences of what happened. And as we're interviewing them, various of us are sitting around a table and taking notes and preparing affidavits in anticipation that litigation would actually happen and the courts would not shut us down. It was shocking to hear machines being shut down, people having video of what are those things called? When you take them in and out of the voting machines, the
DS-200s.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever they call them in Pennsylvania. That this one took it out, and I mean, it was literally like a bad Hollywood movie. As a matter of fact, I will tell you, I was very disappointed with AG Barr because we tried to get the U.S. attorney in Philly to seize machines, and we were told, stand down. Like, Barr was like, la, 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 I don't want to hear anything. It was
Wow.
quite dispiriting. So we took a lot of statements. We had a lot of information. There was a law firm that was representing President Trump at the time, and they ended up quitting. Why did they end up quitting? Because the left was engaging in tactics saying, we're going to go after you for representing President Trump. And there's something called Project 65, which is a nonprofit, probably Soros funded. I don't know, but who knows, not such a wild stretch. That is, to this day, intimidating. If you look up Project 65, I believe what it's called, intimidating attorneys and saying, you better not represent Trump because we're going to go after you, like we did Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, and a whole host of other attorneys. So nevertheless, the law firm that was representing President Trump at the time ended up quitting because they were getting clients who were saying, you're going to lose us as a client if you continue to represent. There was a lot of that going on. So the man couldn't even get fair representation in our country. It was shocking that would happen in America. So I was taking statements and so forth. And then a very small group of us, there was a total of 4 attorneys, were sitting around one day, and not me, I will not take the credit for something that was not my brainchild, but a colleague had said, when I look at this law known as Act 77. It's very important. This is the law that permitted no excuse mail-in ballots that passed the Pennsylvania the legislature in 2019, I believe it was, or 2020. He said, I think this is unconstitutional. We said, what do you mean? Well, in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Constitution provides for only three bases for a mail-in ballot, all of which were excuse related. Mm-hmm. You were in the military, whatever. And you had to prove that you could not get to the polling place, and therefore you were able to get an excuse ballot. So they had no provision for no excuse mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania under their own constitution. So for the legislature in Pennsylvania, and I must tell you, it was a Republican majority legislature that said, hey, why don't we change the law to say you can have no excuse mail-in ballots? That's fine, but there is a constitutional roadmap that must be followed in order for that to happen. So the legislature had to seek an amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution to enable no excuse mail-in ballots. It's a very complicated procedure. You have the referendums, it's a very, very involved process, including publication in periodicals so the public knows, and it's put out to referendum. Then the Pennsylvania Constitution gets amended that says, okay, it's good. And then you go and you pass your legislation. It's a very clear but laborious process. So the Pennsylvania General Assembly starts the process in 2019. And along the way, they realized we're not going to get this done by 2020. So you know what? We're going to forget the constitutional process, and we're just going to pass a law that says no excuse mail-in ballots. So they did that. They opened the door to stupidity. And then the Dems said, great, it's COVID, let's take it and run. So the Secretary of State loosened this rule and that rule, and the Attorney General did. And the Republicans opened the door to the Democrats just changing things as they were going, which is against the federal Constitution. When you have a federal election, the Constitution says that the state legislatures determine time, place, and manner for voting, not at the time Josh Shapiro, who was Attorney General, and I forget the woman's name, Kathy somebody or other, I think, who was the Secretary of State. So back to this, the four of us attorneys sitting in a room as we're taking a break from taking statements from people, and one of the attorneys said, I think this no excuse mail-in ballot law, it's unconstitutional. So we decide we're going to sue the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. This little four group of people, and then we had all volunteer, getting paid zipperoonie, and we needed to find a Pennsylvania attorney to file the case. So I said, okay, I'll take that on. How hard could this be? It's not a case that involves whether there's fraud or not. It's literally a case on the law. Simple, straightforward. It's just arguing the law. It was almost like the good old days with the yellow pages where you start at A and keep going down. I'm totally aging myself here. It was so hard for me to find a lawyer. We had a memo, and I had lawyers say, Julie, I want to take this case. It's a really good case. The legislature violated the law, but I can't. My partners won't let me. One law firm after another. I am telling you, I went through multitudes of law firms. I finally found a lawyer who said, in essence, he said it a lot more politely, but he said, bleep this, I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. So we had the lawyer, we had the case, we had the plaintiffs, and the plaintiffs one was Sean Parnell, who was running for the Senate at the time, and he, quote, lost, although he was winning like the day before. And he said, I'll be a plaintiff. Then we had Congressman Mike Kelly from the western part of the state. He said, I want to be a plaintiff. And then we had I believe, one or two voters who were disenfranchised because their ballots were not counted on that day. And so we filed our lawsuit in Commonwealth Court. As a matter of fact, somebody from the Trump campaign called and said she would be involved in it. And I said, no, honestly, you've got cases based upon whether there was fraud or not, which, in my opinion, there was a lot of fraud, a lot of inappropriate activity. But this is a case just on the law. Let's get through it. And I had several people say, well, what about all those people who voted? They're going to be disenfranchised. And I said, you know what? True. I said, but the population of Pennsylvania is like 9 million people, something like that. All of them were disenfranchised because they were never given the opportunity to vote to see if they even wanted their constitution amended. So now there's a balancing act. Do you just disenfranchise people who voted by mail, or the entire electorate of Pennsylvania whose voices were not heard? So we filed our case in Commonwealth Court. The day after Thanksgiving, the Commonwealth Court issued an opinion in our favor and said, it was a preliminary injunction. But when you get a preliminary injunction, it's like their likelihood of success on the merits is such that stop certifying. So our little group, most people don't even know this. We got the certification that had not happened yet because they were pushing some through. Stop right now until we have a case on the merits. The other side, under the leadership of Mark Elias, whose name you may know, he's really the evil guy, lawyer-wise on the other side. They immediately appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is a 5-2 majority, D to R. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court reversed and said, oh, no, you waited too long to file your lawsuit. We filed the lawsuit 2 weeks after the election. So we then filed a petition for cert to the Supreme Court, which gets us to, Kathy, when you said, wow, they took the case this time for Virginia. This was a perfect case for them to take. They didn't have to address whether was there fraud, you like Trump, you don't like Trump, I don't want to be political. They didn't have to go there with our case, and they wouldn't take the case. So a law still stands on the book in Pennsylvania, and now it is, quote, likely too late, that is unconstitutional.
So where do we stand today, Julie? As you've been looking at this, Pennsylvania obviously really incredibly well. I think there are a lot of Republicans I know every day on my radio show that say, does my vote count? Is the system safe this time around? There have been some changes. Has the RNC done enough? Do we need to do more? Where do you think we are a few days before the election?
So I stay in touch with some people at the RNC. I know that there is a vast, vast difference from 2020. As you can see, they're on the cases ahead of time. The case in Bucks County that was just decided maybe yesterday, I'm like losing track of days here already, where people were pulled out of line. And the law very clearly says you're in line. You can't, they get to go in and vote. And a colleague of mine, a really smart guy, I'm going to give him a shout out, Wally Zimmelong, who I work with on some other cases in Pennsylvania and who I know, was the attorney or is the attorney who was just in the Bucks County courtroom for that case. And he won. So the judge said, no, you can't disenfranchise these voters. So I think it's just a way of saying, as an example, that the RNC is doing a lot better, that there are attorneys that are in different places. Is it as good as the other side? Honestly, I don't think so, because to me, there's a big difference generally between R's and D's, between the conservatives and, I will say my words, the Marxists. Their job, their mission in life is government. So this is all they do 24/7. Our side, the conservatives who care about faith and family and working for a living and government, leave me alone, we have day jobs, right? So we have a little bit more so they're always going to have more people who are willing to 24/7 be 10 steps ahead of us. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. Now, do I think, if your question is, do I think we could have done better? At this point in the game, I don't want to, point fingers. I think they're really trying now. I mean, for years I've been saying I can't even stand the term election integrity. I don't even understand what that means. I think for most Americans, they say, does my vote count? Is it secure? So to me, integrity applies to a person, not a thing, not a process. So I don't think there was between 2020 and 2024, there was enough pressure or enough attention paid on election security. But I do think since Mike Whatley and Lara Trump got to the RNC, I think there has been a lot of work that has been done.
I mean, to your point about the energy and effort that the other side puts into this, the very fact, as I was mentioning, that there were 12 to 15 lawyers on the government side for this hearing versus the 4 on our side. But what I have to say, what I see in Virginia, because we've had an incredible election integrity, election security team trying to unravel this. They got to work, and it was just average citizens who got to work on this after 2020 because they were suspicious. And I want to tell you, it's taken them 3.5 years of FOIAs and following the thread. The whole system has gotten so complicated, but they finally figured out a lot of what's not working about it. And I'm with you. I don't understand why more has not been done in the last 4 years. Why does Virginia still have 45 days of early voting when we have no, COVID to deal with? Okay, but that's not my question. The question I want to ask you, because this is an incredible story that you've told us about Pennsylvania. And I think one of the things that I want to ask you is, do you feel that the story of what happened in 2020 has been told? I'm thinking about, I like Christina Bob's book a lot. She was there in Arizona. She was in a number of places. I think she did a good job of diving into it. But do you feel that we have heard what really happened in 2020, or is that a story still to be told?
I do not think that we know everything that happened in 2020 by any means. And I think the left has been incredibly successful in imposing a chilling effect, meaning there are lawyers who are getting, you saw what happened with Rudy Giuliani. The man had to sell his watches. And that's, we know about him because he's Rudy, right? But this is happening. I know attorneys who are fighting for their life for doing their job. Look at John Eastman. It's crazy. I don't think we're ever going to know, quite honestly. And I think there's a little bit, and I think some of it's our side too, saying, you know what, move along. Let's look forward. You're just picking up the past because you can't handle it.
The intimidation factor. You look at John Eastman, who's a friend. Who in the world in their right mind would want to put themselves through what these people have been through?
And he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And had a great position, law school and so forth, teaching. And it's what I experience at a very, as I said earlier, but at a much smaller scale, with law firms saying, off the record, I want this case. I want this case so badly. I want this case because as an attorney, to be able to go into a courtroom and say the Constitution of my state was breached, was violated. Wow. Lawyers don't get that kind of case. And this was really a good case. I'm not just saying it because, it was our case, but it was a good case. And they would not take it because they saw what was going on. It was like a domino effect of attorneys knowing that they faced really frightening consequences for trying to uphold their ethical duty.
Just switching gears a bit and Julie, we want you to come back because you can tell us all kinds of great stories. You truly embody the happy warriors that we are on the Happy Women podcast. But we have a clip of something that happened on The View in which Mark Cuban had a comment about women in the orbit of Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Donald Trump, you never see him around strong, intelligent women, ever. It's just that simple. They're intimidating to him. He doesn't like to be challenged by them.
So I take huge issue with that. I think we could all make a laundry list of smart, intelligent women who support Donald Trump, who are in his orbit. I would put the three of us in that circle. That being said, the Harris campaign is really putting out this push that they are the campaign pro-women. Women have to be crazy not to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I will tell you, growing up and living in the state of California, I've watched Kamala Harris say that she has fought for women. And I've also watched her legalize date rape with Proposition 47 in our state, reclassifying felonies as misdemeanors, not helping children who were abused by the Catholic Church, calling an illegal immigrant who murdered a young man, basically a pimple on a program that she did. I mean, this woman is all over the place, but her campaign loves to say that they are pro-women. I don't believe that to be true. I think actually much of what they stand for is anti-women. What do you think, Julie?
We need like a 4-hour podcast.
Yeah, we do.
Yes, because, and it's very serious. Like I can make a joke about this, but I'm trying to get my, in what order I want to address what you're saying, because there's so much there. I'll start off by this. I practiced immigration law for 30 plus years, and I know it very well. And I know the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, which is actually a very logical, solid law, just a lack of enforcement. Okay. So we need immigration reform, which even our Republican friends say. I want to smack them and say, like, what the heck? You don't even know what you're talking about. But the proper term is illegal aliens. That's what the law refers to them as. When people come into this country and they put their little feet on our ground, they are, by virtue of that act, breaking the law and therefore criminals. So when this woman, when I call her Kamala, but I'll call her Kamala here, when Kamala talks about women's rights in the time that we have been on this podcast together, I shudder to think, and I really don't think I'm being melodramatic here, the number of girls and women who have been raped and trafficked at the hands of the cartels due to these illegal aliens that are freely, not just walking across our border, but that we're paying for to be flown in with their CBP app is shocking. So that's number one. You care about women, then you should care that they're not trafficked. Because, and I give credit where credit's due, I think Marx said it very eloquently when he said, we have not seen slavery since the Civil War as much as we do today, with women,
1,000%,
girls being trafficked and enslaved. So that's number one. That's like exhibit one to why she really is lying. She really, really lies. Number two, you care about women. Think about every mom who's watching this, or aunt or grandmother, whomever, who have been to their granddaughters, their children's or nieces' sports events where mom or whoever schleps those kids to soccer practice and this and that, and they have dreams about practicing and this and that. Well, goodbye, because right now you have to compete against boys. You have to compete the old men and women's sports. It's also girls in boys and girls sports. So I don't want to hear about women's rights when you are willing to completely take Title IX and throw it out the window. Number three, and we don't even like the economy. I don't go to the store and buy eggs. Like I'm okay paying $5 a dozen instead of $1.97. That's a women's issue and a men's issue. And I mean, like, first of all, this whole men, women thing. I know the three of us didn't grow up on this men, women, black, white. This is a classic Marxist divide, conquer, different classes, different this, different that. But unfortunately, we have to respond to it. So they put us in a situation where we have to talk this way. So economic issues are women's issues. You want to talk about something? How about her husband, Dougie Emhoff? So Dougie, if she cares so much about women's rights, Dougie has an affair with his kid's nanny. She gets pregnant. I have no idea what happened to the baby. Maybe you guys do. I don't know. But he paid her $80,000 to, in the legal world, that's called an NDA, unless you're Donald Trump, and then it's hush money.
Julie,
Right?
just to interject with that story, I think it was the Daily Mail that reported that said the woman actually blamed him for losing the child. Now, whether she lost it the natural way or lost it another way, not having that child was something that she blamed him for, which is probably why there was an NDA to begin with.
Well, and that's funny. I know the article you're talking about. So the article goes on to discuss how this woman's pregnant, the nanny/teacher. I think she was a teacher who also ended up being their nanny/babysitter, and LAPD or whomever gets called to the house where she lives, because it wasn't just an altercation. It was like a class, whatever. They rate the degree of the severity of a disagreement and altercation, and it was pretty high. And so the Daily Mail was basically saying that it was a big deal. And then after that is when she lost the baby. So you're right. That's worth mentioning. But this is a guy, she's so concerned about women's rights. You married a man who had an affair with your stepchild's nanny, and the media is silent. But then what about his ex-girlfriend before he met Kamala, before he got married to the woman whose child he then impregnated the nanny? This is total soap opera stuff. He was dating a woman, an attorney, apparently a very smart woman. I read this article with a degree of interest, and they were in Cannes. I think actually they were at a Harvey Weinstein party at the Cannes film. Totally coincidental. She probably had no idea anything about the guy. And they were waiting in line for the valet to bring the car. And the woman tapped the valet guy on the shoulder because she wanted to cut ahead in the line, but to do it in a way that was semi-kosher. So she was going to offer him a big tip to get the car. So she tapped the guy on the shoulder, and Dougie took it as her hitting on the guy getting the car. And he slapped her so hard that she spun around. And she was so shocked that she slapped him and said, whoa, what are you doing? And then they they left. And this isn't just one of those, she said, he said, because that night she reported this to people in real time. So it wasn't, one of these kind of, and he's never denied it, by the way. And the media, of course, has never picked up on it.
No, and if Trump had done that, their heads would have exploded. I mean,
100%,
unbelievable.
100%. You're exactly right.
And this is the party that says they're for women.
And this is the party for women. So Mark Cuban, because this is what they do. This is like kindergarten behavior when you can't talk about the issues, because they have no issues to talk about other than if they want to fess up and say, we are Marxists. We want to further destroy our country farther than Joe Biden and Kamala have already taken it. That's, if they're going to be truthful, that's all they can say. They have to lie. So Mark Cuban, I mean, look, I've never thought he was particularly bright. I think he got his monies through a little bit of, luck and being in the right place at the right time. But if you ever watch Shark Tank, he was, shall we say, not the sharpest knife in the drawer of the guy who was sitting up there.
Not the fiercest shark in the ocean.
Exactly. Never put his neck out or was willing to do anything. When you take people like Kayleigh McEnany, any Kellyanne Conway, I could just zillions of women. And I can tell you, as general counsel of a company and deputy general counsel of a company, the number of females, I was often like the lone 1 or 2 or 3 senior women or officers in the company. He has so many and had so many senior women in leadership. I've met him. I've spent time with him. This is a guy who judges people on their brains, their creativity, their loyalty, and their leadership. He couldn't care less if you were a Pop-Tart. Okay. if you're smart and you're a hard worker, that's what he cares about.
Yeah. No, this is so true. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has been great talking to you, Julie. I'm so thankful that you came on, and these are great insights, and we're going to have you back because this has been really terrific.
I'd be happy to. You both are superstars, and it's an honor to be with you.
Oh, right back at you. Julie Strauss Levin doing some great work. And we thank you for joining us. Another episode of the Happy Women podcast. Thank you for those 5-star reviews. We appreciate them. Share Happy Women with your friends. Connect with us at thesalempodcastnetwork.com. And of course, get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism, available wherever you get your books. You can find her online as well. KatieGorka.org. Search her out on Facebook, Catherine Gorka. You can find me there too. Just look for Jennifer Horn Radio on Facebook and Instagram, and Jennifer Horn on Truth and on X. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Happy Women podcast.